Hello, and welcome to Evidence to Employment, Transition Research in Action, where research meets real life, where the future of work for youth with disabilities is being reimagined. I'm your host, Carolyn Cage. I'm the Director of Training for the VCU-RRTC on Employment Among Transition-Age Youth with Disabilities, or as we like to call it, RRTC Transition. In this series, I'm talking with researchers, educators, and youth to unpack the stories, strategies, and data behind this work. For a closer look at our research studies, visit us at transition.vcurrtc.org. I am so excited to be talking with our guest today. I have known her for about 5 years, and we recently celebrated a milestone in our tenure together. But I really want to get to know her better, and I want the audience to get to know her. So we'd like to welcome Jaclyn Camden from VCU. Welcome, Jaclyn. Can you introduce yourself and tell us a little more about you?
Thank you so much for having me, Carolyn. I'm really excited to spend some time just kind of talking about the work that we are doing. So I'm Jaclyn Camden from the Rehabilitation Research and Training Center on Employment Among Transition-Age Youth with Disabilities, and I am the study lead for the research study called Towards Higher Education for All Youth with Disabilities.
So Jaclyn, tell us how you became interested in this field.
So I have been working here at Virginia Commonwealth University, VCU, for about 15 years now. And currently I work, some of my work focuses on the RRTC of on employment among transition-age youth with disabilities. So a part of that center, I am the project director, as well as the study lead for the study we'll kind of focus on during this podcast. So I wear a lot of different hats, but really my work focuses on outcomes for students with disabilities, whether that's employment, whether that's education, whether that's a mix of both career development and planning while in college, which is some of the studies and work that I'm doing right now.
So you're doing some very important and fascinating work, and you have a lot of experience in it. Can you tell us more about that moment when you realized this is the kind of work you want to do? What in your experience let you know that helping students with disabilities pursue higher ed was your mission in life?
Yeah, I don't know if there is an exact moment to say, like, this is what I want to do, and I know this is what I want to do. I think for me, it's a collection of moments and experiences, and I could imagine that's probably the same for a lot of people. But I think probably the first moment, when I think about moments that really pushed me into the work that I'm doing, is probably my own experience sitting in my school counselor's office in high school, talking about college, and her telling me that I'm really not college material, that maybe I need to think of a different path. So I think that moment really impacted me and kind of ignited this passion of not wanting other people to have that experience. And so not only did I want to prove that school counselor wrong, which I did, but I also wanted to do work that helped students and professionals that are working with students to be held to high expectations and to have opportunities and not to be told that they can't do something when they are very capable of doing something. So I think that was kind of a passion moment for me. But I think if we kind of fast forward, because I've been doing for 15 plus years kind of work supporting students with disabilities, whether that's in school, whether that's in employment, higher education. But I think the moment that I knew I wanted to kind of focus in on post-secondary education was probably my first year working with ACID in college, which is VCU's inclusive post-secondary education program for students with intellectual disabilities. So my first year working there, and I attended VCU's graduation and got to see kind of the first cohort of students that I worked with around accessing employment, career development, internships, walk across the stage and really begin kind of that next chapter of their lives and moving into careers after college. So, graduation for many of us is a very joyous occasion. And I really wanted to be a part of even just a small part of ensuring that joy continued after graduation as students are entering and kind of that post-graduation life. And so that first time I attended a graduation with my students, that's where I kind of felt like this is my place. This is the work that I want to do. This is really what I'm excited about. So I think those are kind of my moments that really stuck with me.
I really love that because I come from a time where higher education for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities was, just like your counselor said, not even an option. It wasn't even to be considered. So the work you have done have made that possible. So now tell me, I understand you're pursuing a doctorate and leading this research study at the same time. That's incredible. That's impressive. So how are things different than from when you first started this research?
Yeah. So thinking about kind of, the work that I'm doing around higher education, thinking about when I first started, 2015 is really when I started getting into the work around higher education, specifically looking at career development, access to internships, experiential learning, employment opportunities. I think one of the biggest things and one of the most exciting things that have changed is we just see more students with disabilities in higher education than we have before. So I'm hoping a lot of the work that we're doing, K through 12 to prepare students, to raise those expectations, to support professionals and having those high expectations is trickling into students accessing higher ed. So we're just seeing more and more students, which means that there's a need to be able to support those students who are entering into college. But I think that one of the biggest changes, whether it's, in the work that we do now, what I see as a doc student myself is the change around technology and how that has shifted the labor market, how that has shifted the work that we do, how we do our work, how we can support students doing their work. So I think this kind of rapid growth in technology and the types of technologies that we're seeing is really transforming the landscape of higher education, as well as the landscape of just the workforce and the labor market. In fact, I was reading a report, and according to the 2025 Future of Jobs report by the World Economic Forum, 39% of the skills that kind of make up the workforce, what we're training students to use and go out into the workforce, are really going to be obsolete, or they're dramatically shifting. And not only the skills, but we're going to see a huge growth in new jobs, a decline in some of the current jobs that we're seeing in the labor market. And a lot of those emerging jobs are around technology and also other STEM related careers. So I think, as professionals, as people supporting people with disabilities around higher education, around career, we really have to understand this like changing of the landscape and what technology is doing, for better or for worse, if you will. But I think that kind of technology piece is one of the biggest changes I've seen since kind of entering this field into now.
Are there any students whose journey kind of stayed with you long after the semester? I mean, you've been talking about the impact of technology and how we need to prepare differently, not only K through 12, but higher ed. So where do you have a student who has already kind of made that transition, and in a non-traditional job, or their journey has changed from what was expected?
Right. Yes. So I think some of the stories, especially around technology, that really kind of come to mind is what I call my COVID kids, those that entered into college during COVID, and when things were getting shut down, and really, I think, changed the way that we viewed work, and how we work and where we work. So one of the stories that I think about is one of my students that was going through college during COVID, and a time where we kind of shut down. Places weren't hiring. A lot of their workforce wasn't in working, or if they were working, they weren't in the building. And so we really had to think critically about how can we still get these critical internship and employment experiences when everything is shut down. And then how do we provide that support when we're not in person with each other? And so we were able to work with a student with a large employer in our area to do a virtual internship. And so the employer supplied all of the, technology, laptops, all of that to the student's house, and did their internship remotely. And the student is somebody that needed support. So we used Zoom, which everybody uses now, but really we didn't use it prior to that, but use Zoom to provide support. So they would be working alongside the student during their internship through Zoom and providing support, and used a lot of the different kind of online technologies that we see now. And that experience, even though we weren't sure how it was going to work, was so successful that the student was offered a job and still works in that company after graduation, because he was able to pivot. We were able to figure out how do we connect the student with the opportunity and how do we support them virtually. So I think that this kind of virtual platform, students don't have to do internships right in their local community. There's a lot of virtual remote opportunities and that students can get connected with, and we can still provide that support through these kind of online technologies, Zoom, Google Meets, all the other things that you use. So I think that's kind of really stuck with me, is the need for innovation, right? And it's not just technology, but innovation. Us as professionals supporting students need to be creative, innovative. We need to figure out how to pivot with the changes that we're seeing in order to support students.
That's great. That's great. So let's talk a little bit, give us a kind of an overview of the study that you're starting now, your current study. Can you tell us about the research you're leading?
Right. So the study that I am working on right now, just kind of briefly, is looking at creating a professional development model to train college professionals on how to support students in internships and employment. So we're doing that through creating an online training module. So we have an online training course. Then we pair it with a year of a community of practice where the professionals who are engaged in this study come together, get support from our facilitators, other experts in the field as we kind of learn how to implement supports and services for students with disabilities as they're accessing these opportunities. So it really is looking at the effects of this professional development, so training professionals on the experiences that students with disabilities are getting around internships and employment. And this study is really built off of a previous study that we did. So we did this kind of model previously, but we did it specifically for college professionals working with students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And we found that it was really impactful, that students were getting more internships, they were getting more paid employment. The college professionals felt more equipped to provide those disability-related supports and connect them with opportunities. So we took the success from that study and really broadened the study to look at students with all disabilities. So not just for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, but we want to see if this intervention, this model really works for college professionals supporting a wide range of disabilities.
Okay, so that's an interesting point because I'm familiar with ACID and inclusive higher ed, but what information or data did you have that led you to see the need to expand it to students other than those with intellectual disabilities, students with, say, just a learning disability or physical disability? How do you want this study to impact that group of students?
Right. So we really started with students with intellectual and developmental disabilities that are going through these inclusive higher education programs. But we know they're not the only students with disabilities that aren't getting access to those critical experiences that they need to be successful in obtaining internship and employment for post-graduation outcomes. And so because we know that there's a need, because the research tells us that students with disabilities across categories are not getting access to professionals that are equipped with the skills and knowledge needed to support students with disabilities, and they're not accessing experiences while enrolled at the same levels as their peers without disabilities, and also they're not graduating at the same level into careers. We really wanted to see if this intervention, this model could have a wider impact across the students with disabilities entering college. So we're really excited about that kind of potential to expand the number of professionals that are equipped to support students with disabilities around career development.
And when you refer to college professionals, you're not just talking about instructors, right? You're talking about anyone who comes in contact with a student who happens to need an accommodation in college. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, we're actually most likely wouldn't be instructors. They could. So when we say college professionals, and I think, Carolyn, I appreciate the opportunity to explain this. I don't think I was very clear, is really anybody who has a role or an oversight in providing those career-related supports and services to students. That could be career service folks, that could be disability resource office folks, that could even be people who are running specific programs like IPSE, or inclusive post-secondary education programs. So it really, again, broadens the number of professionals that we're looking at in this study to anybody that is doing work to support students in their career development on campus.
Okay. So I know most colleges have offices of accessibility, or what we used to call disability services. So this is to enhance or broaden across the campus that outreach to those students, would you say?
Yes, I think, and a lot of, participants that we're going to get are going to be from career services. They also might be from, accessibility offices. But one of the major barriers is getting students to walk through the door to receive these services, right? And so that is something that we'll talk about during this professional development is how do you create spaces? How do we ensure that the students that need the services are getting the services? So it is also that kind of access point as well as getting students to come in the door that maybe didn't before for a variety of different reasons.
So, Jaclyn, this has been some incredible information that you have provided, and it's really been great getting to know you. I am looking forward to the next session of our podcast where you will kind of give us the behind the scenes on your research study. Looking forward to that.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you so much for joining us. The contents of this podcast were developed under a grant from the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, grant number 90RTEM0014. NIDLR is a center within the Administration for Community Living, Department of Health and Human Services. The contents of this podcast do not necessarily represent the policy of NIDLR, ACL, HHS, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government.